Hello, welcome back to the program of Leadership with Darrell W. Gunter. Well, today I'm happy to have back a very dear friend and great former colleague at Seton Hall University, Mr. Leo Bottary. He's going to talk about the second edition of Peernovation. Leo, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. Always great to be here. I think this is my third time on the show, so very
I, I,
excited.
I believe it's your third time. I was about to say fourth, but I think it's definitely
Yeah.
your third. And I think it's important for people to know that you are a thought leader in leadership, collaboration, and peer advisory group. Your work helps leaders and organizations to harness the power of peer groups to drive innovation, engagement, and performance. So it's great to have you back on the show. But before we jump in, could you, for the guests who do not know you. Could you give them a little bit about your background, education?
Sure. So I am founder and managing partner of Peernovation LLC. And what this company does, based out of Carlsbad, California, is we work with peer advisory groups, CEO peer advisory groups all over the world to help them maximize the value of their engagement. But then we also take what the highest performing CEO peer groups around the world have been doing so brilliantly for decades, and we help companies apply these principles and practices, the teams in their companies. So, it's really exciting work. It's great to see the difference it makes in so many people's lives. Beyond that, I kind of came up through a world of corporate communications. I did have my own firm for a while, for about 5 years before I sold it. I've also worked for some of the largest firms in the world, people like, Hill and Knowlton or Mullen, now Mullen Lowe. Fantastic experiences there. But there was a time where I was at Vistage and I headed up brand communications when I was there, and I led a brand refresh for the company. And at the time, I'm going around the company and I'm talking with CEOs and business leaders and I'm asking them, like, how do you learn? How do you grow? How do you bring new thinking in your companies? And to a person, they would tell me things like, well, I read books, I hire a coach, I hire consultants, I go to events and conferences, I watch TED Talks, you name it, on and on and on, right? They named everything except being part of a peer group. So a few months later, I'm reporting on the rollout to the board of directors, and I took the opportunity to share this experience I was having in the field. And I basically said, you know what? How long are we going to be content with this being a great kept secret? I mean, the reality is that, at least in my mind, I feel like we're trying to sell a Mercedes to someone who doesn't even know what a car is. So the idea was, why don't we look at this entire category, not just from a Vistage perspective and write some kind of hardcover brochure about the company, but to look at all the peer groups around the world and what they do, at least all the major ones who were covering, CEOs and business leaders across the globe, and look at how and why they do what they do so well, and how and why CEOs benefit from it, and their direct reports, quite frankly, and beyond that. So I've taken that work as kind of my life's work now, combined with, and I will tell you what got it all started really was Seton Hall University. Because prior to my joining Vistage, I was part of a learning team at Seton Hall. Now think about this. I graduated college in 1983 from Jacksonville University. I go back to graduate school in 2006. Well, a lot had changed since then, right? So back in 83, education was a solo pursuit. You're listening to the professor, you're taking notes, you're shielding your paper from other people, and all this other kind of stuff. Um, and yet, when I go to Seton Hall, I'm part of a learning team now. And it's like, wow, this collaborative learning, right? It would have been called cheating back 20 plus years earlier. But now here we are, and I'm learning most from my fellow course mates, second from the material that we were charged with, reading and understanding, and lastly from the professors. And the professors, by the way, would gladly accept that characterization of what they created. It was entirely by design. And I think what they did was rather extraordinary. It also inspired me to do my doctoral work at Northeastern University. I am, however, one of those people that's ABD, all but dissertation. Finished all my coursework, but largely my goal changed. The reason I shifted was because as I got into the peer work, on one hand, driven by Seton Hall, and on the other, it was the thing where I said, you know what I really want to do? You know what I'm really passionate about is working with the CEO, these CEOs and business leaders. I was an adjunct at Seton Hall still at the time. Today, I'm an adjunct at Rutgers. But I get that academic part, satiated, I think, being able to do that, being in touch with students and what's next. But by the same token, I get to work with CEOs around the world and help them with their organization. So it's kind of a healthy combination, but it's kind of a little bit of what I've done, what fuels my passion, and kind of why we're sitting here today talking about a second edition of a book that I never dreamed of writing. So.
Right. And I remember your first book, you had a partner in that first book that you did, correct?
Yes, name was Leon Shapiro. He was the former, well, now the former CEO of Vistage. He was CEO of Vistage at the time, and we co-authored a book called The Power of Peers, and that was driven by that very activity I mentioned, where let's look at peer groups everywhere, and let's look at how and why they do what they do so well, and why people benefit. And so that was called The Power of Peers, and that was released in 2016. I wrote two books on my own after that, including What Anyone Can Do, which
Right.
was essentially interviews with really successful people, where the big finding actually with this was successful people ask for help. Okay. None of them do it alone. They don't see asking for help as a sign of weakness. They understand it for what it is, an act of resourcefulness. And because of that, they are able to enlist and engage the support of others. And quite frankly, do the things that anyone can do that most of us don't. And left to our own devices, we never will. So surrounding yourself with the right people becomes huge. Peer innovation, of course, simply was designed to build the bridge between peer advisory groups and how to take these principles and practices into your teams. And that was written in 2020 after working with about 125 groups and teams. Today, that number has eclipsed 800. So, as you might imagine, 5 years later, you learn a few things along the way. So, we have, updated content, 5 new chapters. We have, it was an exciting project.
And when is it already released, or it will be
And
released
just last week, yeah,
last week?
just last. So I would
Congratulations.
say it was available on Amazon on the 26th of March.
Okay.
And as I last checked, we've already got 20 Amazon reviews, 5 stars with a lot of good commentary around it. And I will say about the reviews, it isn't so much about being positive, which I obviously appreciate that, but I really liked the takeaways that are pretty consistent that what they learned was practical. It's actionable. It's something they can really bring into their organization, and it flowed and is easy to understand the models and frameworks that drive this. So they get a sense that it has some heft, and by the same token, they kind of feel like, wow, we could do this. And I think that is really that's what you can only hope for, as an author, and try to convey those ideas in a way that really, I think connects with your readers.
It's very interesting that Vistage is an organized CEO peer group, but that Vistage didn't really recognize the power of peers. What do you think was missing at Vistage that they were sitting uh, on something that's very advanced, but not really, I guess, communicating it effectively to the general business public?
I think they recognize the power of peers just fine. It's that everyone else didn't. You know, Sometimes people don't love asking for help.
Ah,
They do see it as a sign of weakness. And I think as generations have changed and a lot of things have changed in the world where change is faster paced, technology is changing more quickly. There's all these things that are happening where people realize maybe going it alone isn't the smartest idea. And I think people coming to this realization, and of course, Vistage, has been doing this for over 65 years. They're operating in 40 countries now and all. Vistage doesn't lack an understanding of the power of the value proposition, but I think communicating that to an audience that was ready to receive it is a challenge. And it's been a challenge for them, YPO, EO, REF, you just name all of the big organizations out there trying to do this. And so I think that was really it more than anything.
from your perspective, what are the most significant changes from your first book on peer innovation in the second edition?
I would say, first of all, I didn't do enough to communicate There are three dynamics that are important to high performing groups and teams that I felt like I didn't delve into nearly deeply enough in the first version of the book. And I think it's important to understand those more completely. So now you recognize why the five factors become so essential in making those three dynamics possible. So if I were to pick one thing, now clearly there's different stories and there's different data and there's things like that that, support what we're doing. But I would say by and large, that's the big one. That I think brings a level of heft. And I also think that the last chapter in this book speaks to really how to act. What kind of actions are possible for people to take? Not how to act, but of course the ways people can take action. If they want to look at this book, they get to the end and it's like, okay, what do I do now? There are three PDFs that are available for people that you can access. You'll see the links that are in the book. So if they want a peer innovation scorecard, for example, they can access that. If they want to learn how to facilitate groups inside their organizations to work alongside their teams, they can do that. And if they want to take peer innovation principles and practices directly to their teams, there's a DIY version for them also.
It was interesting. One of the questions I wanted to ask is the importance of psychological safety within peer groups. Why is this so critical, and how can leaders foster this type of positive, constructive, supportive environment?
Yeah, psychological safety, to be honest with you, is the whole ball game. Now it starts with getting the right people, okay, for the culture you're trying to create and all that. But the reality is that when Google back in 2012 embarked on Project Aristotle, looking at what separates the very best teams from everyone else, the researchers initially actually thought, okay, whoever has the best players wins. Whoever has the best team, they're going to be, the best performers. The reality, however, and I think most of us understand this, is you can put really great people in a situation where those talents and those gifts really aren't allowed to flourish in a way they could. And because of that, that team will be outperformed by people who may have less individual talent, but those gifts, the gifts they have, are able to come forward and they're able to collaborate more easily and more effectively. So, and at the heart of that is psychological safety. And, it's described in many ways, whether you're looking at Amy Edmondson, obviously, who's the top scholar in the field there, Timothy Clark, and others, who regard it as creating an environment that's safe for interpersonal risk taking, right? It's where we can feel that sense of belonging. It's where we can, ask questions, admit mistakes, contribute our ideas, no matter where we are in the organization, to know that our voice is welcome and that it's heard, and that we can actually challenge the process or even challenge the leader if it's in service of what we've all agreed to do together. It's not about calling someone out or anything like that, right? As you'll see, one of the models in the book is that we're all in this together. It's what we refer to as the servant leadership triad. You've got the leader, a team member, and the team as a whole, all with a shared responsibility for whatever it is we're trying to accomplish in the middle. And embarking and engaging in that keeps you from actually creating that blame culture, right? Where the leader is actually a part of the team, not apart from it. And when that happens, instead of having the team leader over here and the team over here and things start to go sideways, you've got the leader blaming the team blaming the leader. It becomes a mess. When you're all in it together and you celebrate together and win together, but also have each other's back when times get tough, that's kind of I think, a far better model. But again, psychological safety becomes huge in that regard. And I think for a CEO, there's no greater gift than the free flow of information in your company that surfaces mistakes, allows people to learn from them, and allows them to just keep reaching new heights.
It's very exciting. I understand that Miss Amy Edmondson from the Harvard Business School has wrote the foreword, and she is considered to be the thinker, the top mind on this topic. How did she come about developing this psychological safety concept?
How she developed it, I'm not sure I could speak to that very specifically. There were folks that were Edgar Schein and Warren Bennis were kind of, writing around the edges of this for a while. And I think she recognized it for as being as powerful as it was. And I think out of her research emerged this paper that she wrote in 1999, which coined the term psychological safety. And I think from there, she was certainly off and running, has wrote a number of books. Like I said, her most recent books are The Fearless Organization and The Right Kind of Wrong, all award-winning bestseller books that I think because that is so central to what everything we talk about in peer innovation, is all about. It was certainly, a real gift and a real honor to have her part of this book.
Wow, that is huge. Congratulations on that. So let's talk about leaders and leadership. What type of common mistakes do you find that leaders make trying to implement peer innovation principles?
It's an interesting question. There's not a one size fits all on that one. I think part of it, and this is why spending so much time understanding the three dynamics that I mentioned that are important to high performing groups and teams is so important because I think for starters, you have to embrace what that's all about. It has to be part of something that you can believe in.
Right.
I think that's number one. And if you can get someone there, the rest of it is easier, for sure. We actually have a peer innovation readiness assessment in the book that's 10 questions. And it was actually based on this idea from my perspective that, so years ago, I used to run a lot of marathons, and Hal Higdon had this training program. And, several of them, of course, the famous training programs to help marathoners. Well, to start the program, you had to be able to run 7 miles before you even get started. Okay. That was kind of the baseline. So it made me think about peer innovation and saying you can't just jump off the couch and just take on peer innovation tomorrow. So our version of being able to run 7 miles is to be able to answer these 10 questions in a way that shows you and others that you either have a certain level of proficiency and understanding and intentionality about certain areas, or at least you're working at it. And I think that when you can get people in the right mindset, that's the big one. And I think beyond that, just being really good listeners is probably the biggest thing that I think for leaders who are in groups and have experienced it firsthand, it's an easier leap for them because they've experienced what the dynamics of a peer group are all about. And they see, wow, if we could bring that into our team, they kind of get it already. So I think that's a leg up, which is why at the end of the book, I say, if you haven't experienced this firsthand, be a good idea if you did. Now, if that's something that doesn't interest you, that doesn't certainly preclude the idea that you can bring it into your organization. But I think taking that readiness assessment and having some sense after reading the book about what we're talking about, whether you can embrace it, becomes critical.
And so when if there is a leader who's listening to this interview and they go, "Wow, I wasn't aware of this," I'm wondering, where do I get started? How do I get started? And how much time will it take before we'll start to see, improvement in the performance of my organization?
Well, here's the thing. Well, very fortunately, it doesn't just depend on me having to do a program for you. I have certified facilitators on 5 continents that will gladly, get involved with this. They went through a certification program, by the way, that was specially designed not for them to deliver the content as I would, but basically to deliver it as I never could. So, for example, I've got a U.S. Navy captain. I have someone else who has more international business experience that I could have in 3 lifetimes. There's someone else, in Europe who she's amazing and has communication skills that are just next level. So when you take this content and allow these people to attach their own stories and their own experiences to it, it not only makes it more natural for them, but inspires even greater confidence in the people they work with. So everybody who is a peer innovation certified facilitator is really good at what they do and delivering this. As for how long it'll take, every team, every group, they're all snowflakes. Okay. I mean, there's just no doubt about that. I wouldn't suggest that we're going to come in and in 90 days or in, 6 months, this is what's going to happen. In fact, most people take on peer innovation and they have very different goals in mind. People often ask me, well, what can peer innovation do for my company? And I will kind of respond, not trying to be flip about it, but to say, well, what do you want it to do for your company? Because at the end of the day, all we're doing is harnessing the power of peers and channeling that toward whatever they want to achieve. So whether it's trying to operationalize their learning and development, gain alignment behind a strategic initiative, remove silos, whatever it may happen to be for them, you create that program and allow these frameworks to work on an organization's behalf in order to make that possible.
You use the word being very intentional. So what you're
Mhm.
suggesting is that they could say that there's might be five or six issues that they want to address, but you're saying what? Pick one, focus on that, and then move to number two.
Not necessarily. We don't have to be real linear about it, but we do have to be intentional about it. We have to keep things front and center. We try to structure this in a way so that if we do a program for a company, it's not like some one and done that 2 weeks later people are like, oh, that was fun 2 weeks ago, but then no one's doing anything with it anymore, right? So part of what's really important to us is the whole sustainability aspect of this. Now, in some cases, companies will want us to continue to work with them very closely. In other cases, we set a course of action. We help them kind of DIY it in many respects. And then maybe quarterly, we kind of check in or we remain available to answer questions or things like that. So it kind of depends on a whole host of factors in terms of what they do, how they do it, and how long it takes them.
Now, I noticed on your website, I didn't get a chance to read all of it, but I think are you looking to have a conference, if you will, on peer innovation?
Have a conference on it? It's not an immediate plan. Obviously, I would love for that someday. That we would have, I think the kind of following where we are building Peer Innovation Nation as we speak, of people who, can look at this content and kind of recognize it for what it is. On one hand, is it new? I guess, but on the other hand, it's based on proven practices over decades, and I think this is the beauty of it. Um, and again, it's what I loved about reading the reviews and that people were coming away from this feeling, this is something I understand. It's something I could do. And boy, this could really work for us.
I'm sure there's so many different success stories that you have without disclosing any confidentiality, but can you share with us a situation that was pretty tough, but Pure Innovation helped the company to get through whatever was holding them back? And
So,
what were the key things that they learned from that?
yeah, there's a particular story we shared in the book, and it has to do with a company. And again, yeah, I can't disclose who it was or anything, but there were a number of business units they had throughout the country, and they were in pretty remote areas. And so what they recognized was they have all these people. It felt very lonely in terms of they're doing their job. Other than talking to their boss, they really didn't have anybody to confide in terms of some of the common challenges that their counterparts were really facing. So they decided, let's create peer groups among these business unit leaders. So we created three of them, one in the east, west, and central regions, basically. They were eight people apiece. I use the Circles platform, which is and it's part of Circle Space and what Dan Hoffman, came up with. I want to say now it's probably 7 or 8 years ago, probably first started it. The idea was to build a conversation platform, not a presentation platform. So as we're sitting here on Zoom, which I think is obviously perfectly great, many people use it. You've got Teams, you've got Google Meet, and all these other kinds of things. Circles, however, is designed for peer groups specifically. And it does two things that I think are really powerful. A, it's got a number of tools that are incredible for the facilitator to be able to lead a meeting and for people to participate in equal time. But it also is so visually different from the other platforms, if you will, that you feel like I'm in a meeting that's really different from anything else going on my calendar. Okay. So using the Circles platform, we brought these plant managers together. And by the way, 90 minutes a month is all it was. We were able to craft an agenda where we could squeeze every second of it in order to help them maximize the value of that 90-minute investment, which, by the way, after 18 months, and then today they are self-facilitated, these folks became incredibly close. The generosity that they displayed to one another was enormous. They had a tremendous amount to learn from each other. They started visiting each other's plants. They started doing all of these kinds of things, in these various business units. And it was extraordinary to watch what happened, to the point that at the very last meeting, one of the gentlemen, one of the last comments they made, because I was going around and just simply asking, tell us your big takeaway from being involved with this group in the next 18 months, and what do you hope for going forward? And this member basically said, I was looking at all of your names as just names on an email list 18 months ago. Now you're all my brothers and sisters. And
Nice.
it was so extraordinary and so heartfelt. Um, and these folks shared and went through all kinds of things during that time. You go through death, you go through triumphs, you go through tragedy, you go through challenges at plants and business units and all that were so um, all over the map. But they were there for each other and they could empathize with one another in a way that really no one else can. It was a real gift and a real privilege for me to lead those groups, and they continue to exist today. And they recognize the power of peers in a pretty massive way.
That is a great story. Thank you for that. And we're coming down to the last couple of minutes in our interview. Time just flies by so nicely. This has been really fantastic. But what role do you believe that technology and digital platforms, particularly AI, will play in peer advisory groups in fostering innovation?
I think what you're going to see is a confluence of those things. You're going to see artificial intelligence and human intelligence make for collective intelligence. And, it stands to reason that this is a great time to get the people part right because we're going to have to work together to figure out how we can best employ all of the resources available to us, whether it's technology or any whole host of other things, I think that are going to come our way. The change that we're about to experience, I think, over the next 5 to 10 years is going to be just head spinning. So A, we don't want to do it alone, and B, we want to make sure that we are doing it with people. We're together. We are committed to one another's success. We are committed to our craft. We are committed to those we serve, and to doing great things.
Leo, it's been really such a pleasure to have you on the program again. I can't wait to have you back. For our listeners who want to dive deeper into your work, where can they find your book, Pure Innovation, second edition of Pure Innovation, Forged by
You
Deceit?
know, I think Amazon or Barnes and Noble, wherever you want to shop for books, you'll see Peer Innovation Second Edition. It is available, on my website. And I think just to learn more about peer innovation, I think two things. One, you can go to peerinnovation.biz. And secondly, I'm also an opinion columnist for CEO World magazine.
Yes.
And if you go to ceoworld.biz and you typed my name into the search, you'll see about 170 articles written on groups and teams and all of these little nuances and aspects of it that there may be a topic you may find of interest to you. You don't have to subscribe. There's no charge for the article. It's all free content available. So that can be another resource. But I think the website does a nice job of at least framing the overall value proposition in a way that it's like, bam, it gives me a fast look. And then go get the book after that.
There you go. Um, in 20 seconds, can you give us our listeners any last minute advice?
Boy, I don't know that I want to, dole out advice so much as just, I would love it, obviously, if people, picked up the book because I think it'll be really worthwhile for them. I think it'll open their eyes to a lot of the things that I believe they already intuitively understand and have experienced, and now they're going to put it into play.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thanks again, Leo, for coming on the program. We're here with Leo Bottary, the author of Pure Innovation, second edition. If you don't have the second edition, get the first edition because you want to build on that knowledge.
No, get the second edition.
Just get the second edition.
Get
Okay.
the second edition. Dive right in there. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, that wraps it up this week on Leadership with Darrell W. Gunter on WSOU 89.5 FM and streaming on the net at WSOU.net. We want you to have a great day, but remember, leadership, it begins with you.